What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers. Subscribe to our Patreon free to stay in the loop. Arm yourselves. Gaming stuff. And maybe some life stuff. Spoilers for parts of Ghost of Tsushima. However, I went in with some parts of the story spoiled, and it hasn't affected me much. And in terms of spoilers generally, they don't bother me that much because for me, it's not what happens, it's how things happen and how those things feel. Regardless, if you don't want any spoilers, come back another time. Okay, so I haven't beaten Ghost of Tsushima yet. I finished Iki Island and I just finished the Yarikawa Siege. And so far, this game fascinates me on a gameplay and a narrative level. Maybe it shits the bed by the end. Some of the best media seems to want to do that, or seems to want to do that, but so far, overall positive. I'm especially interested in Jin, the main character's character development, because it is at once everything you'd expect, and at the same time, something you don't see often. And I've never seen done this way ever. It's the weirdest thing because this game feels like you've seen this 1,000 times, but you haven't. At least not in this way. And that got me thinking about why I feel that way about this game. And the conclusion I've come to is it's the hero's journey, but inverted. Or maybe a fuller understanding of what the hero's journey is supposed to be. Normally, the hero's journey is standardized. Hero gets called to action, leaves the standard world and enters the magical world, or the unfamiliar world, gets guided by someone who understands what needs to happen, but can't or won't do it themselves, puts together a band of people. You have your crushing moment, then you confront the great evil, have your victory, return to Standard Land as a hero, and you've again seen that a million times. And personally, I've never liked the hero's journey, or at least the way it plays out in most media, because it always feels like it's missing something. And what it's missing is the shadow. And in hero's journey stories, the shadow does play a role. The hero always plays around with or gets intrigued by the shadow, by evil, but there's always that moment they reject it, choose good, and then win that way. And that stinks to me because that's not the way real life works. Ghost of Tsushima's take on the hero's journey is a bit different, a bit truer to life, and it actually has two examples of the hero's journey. One, well, technically it's one overall, but Iki Island, what was originally a DLC, now included as standard in the director's cut, I couldn't imagine playing the game or understanding this story without that little diversion. Because while brief, it crystallizes what I think Ghost of Tsushima is trying to do, which is a more realistic, yet equally, if not more, probably more, empowering form of the hero's journey. There's a lot here. I'm not sure how we're going to organize this, so we'll just start swinging and see what happens. In a more typical story, Jin would realize the samurai, or the samurai code, Bushido, whatever it is not what it presents itself to be. And then he would end up doing that, but for real this time, do it better, and become this gleaming hero. by rejecting the corruption and being as pure and white spirited as they claim they are. That's how a more typical story would go. Instead, Jin starts with a lower understanding or a shakier understanding of what good is. Then he goes low, which doesn't really feel like it's low, especially considering everything going on. And that would be, a shake-up of the hero's journey, but not something totally new or totally different or totally refined. But then, instead of choosing to go high and then higher, Jin goes lower. This is where Iki Island comes in. I did that before the Yarikawa siege, and the story is much better for it because the climax of that siege fits a lot better already having completed Iki Island. I'm not sure when you're supposed to do Iki Island, but for me that worked. So in the main game, aside from the samurai whom you realize pretty quickly are not all they're cracked up to be, everyone is sucking your dick really hard. You go to Iki Island, where Jin's father, um, Kazamusa, I think his name is, or Kazumasa. That's it. Kazumasa did some really fucked up stuff, and it's the complete opposite. And this is great because when I went into Iki Island, I had gotten the Sakai clan armor, upgraded it, so I'm walking around in the full Kazumasa gear, feeling like this invulnerable samurai. This is Jin has taken the throne. He has fully risen to the challenge. And then you go to Iki Island and you get your shit pushed in. Which, in terms of gameplay, generally with Ghost of Tsushima, I like the way they keep the core gameplay never changes much, but they constantly add spices to the stew to keep you on your feet and to keep you feeling a bit weak or not the invulnerable samurai. Iki Island does that, but emphasis on you aren't shit. And the other thing I just realized after beating it was so brilliant. So on Iki Island, you're not allowed to wear that heavy armor, and or you're allowed to wear the armor, but you aren't allowed to wear the aesthetically bulked the fuck up version. And they say you're not allowed to do that, so you can't be identified as a Sakai, but I think the real reason is you are intended to feel weak on Iki Island, so the form of the armor you're allowed to wear is the stripped down version, the weaker version, or appearing weaker version. It's smart. And in terms of outfit, I changed accordingly. So, wearing Jin from Yarikawa's version of that armor, which is the smaller version, thief wrap, and then the improved Sakai helmet instead of the refined one. So you got this samurai ninja thing going on. And it's not Kazumasa's look, it's Jin's look, or at least my Jin's look, reflecting this evolution. Anyway, on Iki Island, you learn a lot about Kazumasa, who is Jin's father, and their relationship, and the shit Kazumasa got up to, the sort of person he was. And I can't imagine playing this game without this DLC, because the question that was bugging me from the very beginning was the way Kazumasa goes out in the first flashback you see of him. He does not go out like a warrior. Frankly, his samurai armor, it doesn't really look like typical samurai armor. He goes out on the ground, crawling, asking for help. But people are referring to him and treating him like he's this great warrior who went out like a warrior. Something's not adding up there. Iki Island is where you figure all this out. You learn it's not just Jin who has daddy issues. Kazumasa inflicted daddy issues on an entire island. and Jin is getting blamed for all of it. And as you're playing through Iki Island and reflecting on Kazumasa's life, you realize there are uncomfortably close parallels with Jin and his father. For a lesser story, Kazumasa would be like a Darth Vader figure, the quintessential example of why you don't go full evil. But unlike Luke Skywalker, who is more overcoming his boyishness, naivete, and incompetence, and rising into power, he does. It's implied, or you're supposed to think of him as flirting with the dark side, but I never really got that impression. Whereas with Jin, the parallels are uncomfortable because Kazumasa fights using terror taken to a high extreme. Jin is fighting using terror to a low to mid extreme. The discomfort immediately comes from recognizing why Kazumasa would use terror as a tactic. It works. In some cases, it's necessary. And by the end, again, in a lesser story, Jin would see this and stop using terror tactics and say, I'm above this, I'm a hero. In Ghost of Tsushima, Jin says, I will continue to use terror. I'll take it to an even higher level, or at least higher compared to Jin, maybe not, or actually as high as Kazumasa, but he'll use it responsibly. And to his credit, he does, Jin does, but again, it's not clean. It is uncomfortable. You get to see firsthand what inflicting terror on people does to people. You get to see the consequences of. And Jin does not say, I won't be a. Jin says, I will be a good. That's uncomfortable. But unlike most other stories like these, that is true to life. Or distasteful things are often necessary. Horrible things are often necessary. You can't swear them off and try to be this bright, gleaming beacon because you saw what the consequences of trying to do that at the very beginning of the game. It's a disaster. So with Iki Island, Jin says, I now understand this terrible truth. The truth, if you want to fight evil, you need to use evil. And the main game tries to do that, but at least where I am in the story, it doesn't hit the way it does on Iki Island. Getting to see Jin's heritage of this shit. Heroes are not clean. Symbols can be clean, but the people required to do dirty work are going to end up with dirty hands. And I love the way this mini inverted hero's journey on Iki Island pans out, or concludes. Jin does not forgive Tenzo and the guy who kills Kazumasa, and they become great friends. That is not what happens. Jin decides not to kill him. He stays conflicted, but he moves forward. And the daddy issues bit, that does not close out the way a more typical story would either. So often in stories about parent issues, the story ends with the child earning the parent's approval, and then the flawed parent gives the child their pat on the head and tells them they're proud of them. End of the story. And those sorts of stories never fit with me either, because that's not the way these sorts of things almost ever play out. These sorts of parents almost never give their children that approval, and when they do, or if they do, if that's even an option, it's almost never something you want or should desire. Because becoming a man or becoming a woman becoming a hero is not earning or is not founded on, or the finish line isn't earning the approval of your family. The full realization hinges on whether or not you have risen to a challenge enough, become capable enough to deal with it. And that is a totally singular individual thing. This is the problem. Are you able to solve it? And Jin does not get the pat on the head or the I'm proud of you. In fact, Jin doesn't even resolve his daddy issues. In double fact, he comes into his own by rejecting that path. He would earn that approval by partaking in pointless, indiscriminate butchery. But committing to that form, which we'll get to, this expression of the Sakai genes, Sakai gene, committing to that expression would make him less able to solve the problem and therefore less able to be a hero. So he chooses to carry and express butchery in a different way. The fact there's no resolution is my favorite part about this. You need to sacrifice the boy you were and the man you'd like to be to become the man you need to be. And that's never a pleasant process, a feel good process, a glamorous process, or even a fulfilling process. Jin doesn't get closure with his daddy issues. He achieves the best outcome in that situation, and that is reaching a point he is able to move on. There is no fixing this, but the only other alternatives are wallowing, staying here and wallowing in the fact you can't fix it, or in approval seeking, going full butcher, becoming unable to solve the problem, and then self-destructing. Sometimes the best outcome, the best you can do, is reach a point you let yourself move forward, leaving this terrible mess in the past. And most stories don't have the balls or the spine, the sand or the minerals to do that, because that's real and it's uncomfortable. And that's why I'm glad I did Iki Island before the Yarikawa Siege, which is the little main quest chain in which you unlock Ghost Stance, which is essentially Butcher mode. And that climax hits so much harder because you unlock it following your ascent from hell. Not as a gleaming, glorious hero, but instead as a refined demon motherfucker. You are less saving your people and more committing war crimes against your enemies, instilling mortal terror in their souls. Mama shouldn't have let you play with killers. Now, Jin does save people in the process, but thinking about it in RPG terms, he is not spec'd for saving people gameplay. He is spec'd for terrorizing the enemy gameplay. And unlocking Ghost Stance, which is a great scene, by the way, but it hits so much harder when you think about Jin's heritage. Jin is the son of a monster. He rejects indiscriminate monstrousness, but he does not reject monstrousness itself, because monstrousness is what's required. And that is... some stories will play with that, but typically when they do, they don't make these quotes monstrous characters actually monstrous. They make them look like monsters, they make them fight like monsters or do whatever, but they're really good people in every other way. This is so uncomfortable. Ghost of Tsushima's interpretation of this is so uncomfortable because with how much Jin is committing, especially more on Iki Island than in the base game, you get the sense Jin is not a completely good guy either. You get to see what his father was like, and genes are important. You get to see the mimetic parallels in their actions. So they're not just related, they are performing similar things. And then on Iki Island, there are a couple moments Jin does, in fact, lose his shit and not act like a good guy. He acts like a monster. He acts like a villain. Because he is a monster doing monstrous shit. He is not, here anyway, a good guy who seems like a monster. He is a monster exercising restraint. And that's another distinction you don't see in many stories. It's so much more gratifying and masturbatory to see a totally good character getting to use or getting to seem like the bad guy, using the bad guy stuff, but there's no question that this character is a good person. So much less comfortable is it to recognize this character you're playing as or rooting for is not a for sure all round good guy, but is instead undecided and exercising restraint. And in these morality plays, being good is typically the good thing. Much more interesting is an expression of good that is not expressed by doing good, but is instead expressed by not doing bad. When this character is doing a lot of bad and would like to do bad. And again, viewing this not as a step on the journey to totally white, unstained, gleaming goodness, but this being the realization, the self actualization. In terms of heroes, the restrained sociopathic is a lot less comfortable than the basic good guy. And in fact, I think that's why people have become so interested in Jason Brody as of late. Similar sort of thing going on there. Dude becomes the quotes hero by becoming the no quotes villain. And then, in a lesser form, but maybe it's not a lesser form, maybe I just haven't thought about it enough, the Eagle, the antagonist of Iki Island, who is this Mongolian invader shaman woman who forces people to drink this quotes poison. It's more like a psychedelic, reminds me of Datura. And this poison kills most people or makes them lose their minds, but the ones who don't lose their minds typically become her shamans. Like a bunch of little fucked up psychedelic quarterbacks. And the reason I called this video, or am titling this video, The Inverted Hero's Journey, is specifically because of the Eagle. I think generally, maybe, the reason this feels so familiar, like you've seen it before even though you haven't, and it's invigorating, is maybe this is a fuller form of the hero's journey that on some level humans are aware of the same way they're aware of the hero's journey, but this one is a little bit upgraded. Potions are a little too strong. Most people don't want to go to this level, but it's there and it's always been there. We just don't get to see it often. The reason I call it inverted is the Eagle. The Eagle feels like a proper inversion of the typical hero's journey. The hero is called to a strange land. He gets his shit pushed in. He goes down to hell. He meets someone who can guide him through hell. He, again, rises to the challenge, becomes powerful, slays the dragon or whatever, and then literally returns to normal land. The difference being, this is not a This is not a positive growth experience. This is not healing. This is like dark healing. Because the eagle is not just the antagonist and someone else is the wise old man teacher. The eagle is the antagonist and the teacher. She's the one who sends you to hell and then helps you get out. Even though that isn't exactly the way she planned it. She planned on you coming out of it with her help as her ally, and instead, again, it's like it goes wrong, and you come out of it not with her help but with her antagonism, ready to defeat her as the antagonist. It's strange, it's brilliant, I love it. I wish they had done more with it. The whole eagle thing is important to the plot, but it feels more like theming or decorations around this Jin coming to terms with his father's butchery and then his own butchery thing. As in, I think they could have told the story they wanted to tell without the eagle, but they did use the eagle, and I wish they had done more with it because it works so well. You're on scary, rainy horror island having a bad trip fighting enemies designed to make you feel weak. They could have gone the eagle or the eagle as the theming could have been done a lot sharper, and it's fine as it is, but they didn't. I wish they had, because that setup for that story works so perfectly. But anyway, you have, with the eagle, you have this inversion of the standard hero's journey within this much larger exploration of a more realistic, fuller hero's journey. It's neat. In summary, the, we'll call it the true hero's journey, is messy, does not resolve everything, does not get every good outcome, but it involves your coming into yourself, whatever you need to be, and what you need to be is probably not going to be glamorous. It's going to be dirty, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it will ultimately be necessary, because who else is going to do it? What is necessary is more important than what's, quotes, good. But in saying that, determining what is actually necessary is very important, so you don't do indiscriminate terrible shit. Although you do need to engage in indiscriminate terrible shit to develop your capacity to do terrible shit, nice and messy. And then the ending will almost certainly not be happy, but you measure your success or you measure yourself not by moral tones, but by whether or not the problem was solved in a satisfactory way. The way you wanted it to be solved, maybe. It's exciting watching a character warp into what they must be to solve the problem, no matter what that warping turns them into. That's so much more real, and that's so much. I don't know, is it honesty? If the hero's journey is supposed to be a path for how you're supposed to deal with problems, maybe this feels good because this fuller form of the hero's journey, the more honest one, the more accurate one, the more realistic one, presents you a path you could actually walk. You can solve problems, but you won't do it as a shining beacon of holiness. You'll be hideous, you'll be hated, but the problem will be solved. And then the last part, more of a gameplay thing. I like the way thematically this all lines up, at least for my playthrough. So I'm not playing on lethal because I'm not suicidal. I'm playing on hard, and hard for most of the game has kicked my ass. Now, when I got that Sakai armor and wore the heavy armor and I felt totally equipped to deal with all the threats in the main game. I go to Iki Island, I get my shit pushed in, but I come out of Iki Island able to fight Iki Island enemies, and now I'm wearing my Jin's armor, symbolizing his interpretation of butchery and necessary evil, and just stomp base game enemies. That duel with that last general was embarrassing. And it felt, again, it all feels like it ties together. Jin is mocking that dude the entire fight, and then you cut his head off, unlocking Ghost Stance, which feels like executive mode, by the way. The gameplay can be really aggravating at times, and I still do have a mixed opinion on Ghost of Tsushima as a game overall, but that mixed opinion doesn't detract from how much I love it. This game feels to me the way I imagine Star Wars felt to a first time Star Wars viewer. Episode 4. I feel like I've seen this 1,000 times, but it hits so right here. But that wraps it up. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.